can take out a loan to buy a house. You can take out a loan to pay for college. But when it comes to retirement, you need to start with a great heaping pile of dollar bills.
You're listening to Life 2, a podcast from Don Ezra and Commonwealth. Don Ezra is a former co-chair of Russell Investments Global Consulting and creator of the retirement website donezra.com. His latest book is Life 2, How to Get to and Enjoy What Used to Be Called Retirement. Commonwealth is a mission-driven business that works with associations, unions, and employers to provide collective retirement plans and has been recognized internationally for its work in expanding access to retirement security. On Life 2, we take a tour of the retirement life cycle, from the time you start saving to your retirement years, while also taking a look at the Global Retirement Challenge. Each episode features an in-depth interview with a leading expert on the topic, followed by The Personal Touch, a segment in which Don breaks down these expert insights and how they might apply to your personal situation. Keep in mind that the podcast is for educational purposes and should not be considered investment, tax, financial, or other professional advice. We start off the episode with Don Ezra and Commonwealth's founding partner, Alex Mazer.
Retirement, or what we call Life 2, is one of life's biggest expenses. And with people working and living longer, traditional retirement planning is becoming more costly and complicated. So we're very excited to have one of the world's foremost financial writers join us to draw on his experience and observations to tell us what goes into a good retirement plan.
A longtime personal finance columnist for the Wall Street Journal, Jonathan Clements is now the founder and editor of Humble Dollar. He's also the author of several books, including From Here to Financial Happiness and How to Think About Money. He speaks to us from New York City.
Welcome, Jonathan. You have two big fans here, eager to learn from you and to capture the wisdom that your books and your website offer the public.
Well, it's delightful to be with you, Don, and with you, Alex. Thanks for having me on your show.
Let's start by your telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, because you've had so much experience at talking to individuals, writing for individuals, and you do it so well. So tell us a little about yourself.
I like to tell people that I've spent 34 years writing and thinking about money. For 28 of those 34 years, I've been an ink-stained wretch. 20 of those years were spent at the Wall Street Journal, where I was the personal finance columnist. These days, I devote most of my energies to writing books and also to running a website called humbledollar.com. When I wasn't an ink-stained wretch, I did spend 6 years on what my friends call the dark side. I worked at Citigroup in New York for 6 years as Director of Financial Education for the U.S. Wealth Management business. So I like to think that I have a unique perspective on the world of money. I've both been on the outside, looking in, and I've also been on the inside, seeing how the beast really works. And
all the way through, the public's benefited from your educational things.
I like to think so. I mean, I certainly feel like I've learned a lot over the last 34 years. There's nothing like having to write about money on a daily basis to sharpen your thinking and articulate what you really believe, and then you put it out there and people are free to tell you, you're talking a bunch of garbage. And that's when you revise and you learn and you improve. So I've had 34 years of having people throw tomatoes at me. So at this point, I feel like I pretty much know what I believe, and I think it's pretty unassailable, but I could be wrong, and maybe you, Don, and you, Alex, will pick me apart today.
Oh gosh, that's not the idea at all. We want to be the intermediaries that bring your wisdom to our listeners. As I say, we're big fans anyway.
So where would you like to start today, Don?
Well, just the whole notion of retirement, both financially and psychologically. What thoughts come to mind when someone mentions retirement?
But of course, when we think about retirement, it's a lifelong journey, and it's a journey most of us should start as soon as we get into the workforce. As I like to tell people, chronologically, retirement may be the last of our financial goals, but we should always put it first. And the reason we should put it first is because retirement is easily our most expensive financial goals. And to amass enough to retire in comfort, we need to spend decades and decades socking away money. You can take out a loan to buy a house. You can take out a loan to pay for college. But when it comes to retirement, you need to start with a great heaping pile of dollar bills, Canadian or US. And to have that heaping pile, you need to save diligently for 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, this is, interestingly enough, not something you borrow for, even though you can take out loans for the other things you mentioned.
Well, you can, of course, take out a reverse mortgage, and we are seeing some of that, but most people are deeply reluctant to tap into their home equity to pay for retirement, and in many cases, with good reason. So yes, you do need to save diligently. Over the years, I've spoken to thousands and thousands of individuals who have amassed seven-figure portfolios. Most of these folks were mediocre investors. Many of them had relatively low incomes, but all of them had one key attribute in common. They were extremely frugal, otherwise known as cheap. The key to financial success is great savings habits. If you have those great savings habits, it'll make up for a multitude of other financial sins. But if you're not a great saver, your entire life is going to be a financial struggle.
I've never heard that comparison before, certainly never expressed that way, that you need to be a great saver even if you're a mediocre investor. And that's a better combination than the other way around. And I think that's a fantastic message to the average person out there who has the capability of saving but doesn't know much about investing at all. I think that's a fantastic message.
And it makes rational sense that if I have $10,000 that I'm saving every year and I'm only earning 4% of my money, I'm still going to be better off than the person who only manages to save $1,000 and is making 10% a year. Having that money socked away on a regular basis is the key to financial success. One of the things I like to talk to people about is what I call the tipping point. When we first start to save for retirement or really for any long-term goal, it is initially, a rather frustrating business because all of the financial progress that we make, or almost all of it, hinges on the raw dollars that we sock away. You will get very little help from the financial markets. But if you persist for a dozen years or so, you hit what I call the tipping point. And that tipping point is when the amount that you earn in investment gains each year starts to rival and then surpass the raw dollars you sock away. And at that point, which you could typically hit after a dozen years or so as a great saver, suddenly from that point forward, your portfolio starts exploding by leaps and bounds. It quickly doubles and triples, and you can go from having $100,000 socked away to within 15 or 16 years having $1 million socked away. But it's getting through that initial discouraging dozen years, socking away those dollars, getting your portfolio up to some sort of critical mass. That's the tough part. But if you get there, everything is easy thereafter.
I did those calculations myself years and years and years ago, and I remember around 12 years or thereabouts. But the way you've captured it, the idea that suddenly a year's investment return is equal to the new money you're putting in, and so you're doubling things from that point on, that's got to be very encouraging.
At that point, it's easy. It's getting to that point that is hard, Don.
Yes. But if you start early enough, it's nice to know that there's going to be that recognition, that tipping point that will come and that will give you all the incentive you need from that point on, because it's the free money. It was not free money, but the money that you are not generating yourself starts to dominate what you're putting in, and suddenly it's such a happy story.
And one of the difficulties in getting through those initial discouraging years is that our lives are a pitched battle between the whiny demands of our current self and the needs of our future self. And for all too many Canadians and all too many Americans, the whiny future self wins out. We give in to the impulse purchase. We max out the credit cards, we spend our entire paycheck, and there's nothing left over to be saved. And what I try to explain to people is that you will almost certainly be that future self. In the US today, if you are 20 years old, there is a 90% chance that you will live to retirement age. And in many countries around the world where people are more careful about their health, the percentage is even higher. So you're almost certainly going to be that future self. And every day that goes by when you don't save for retirement, you are setting yourself up for an unhappy financial future. So the question is, how can you make yourself save for retirement? And many other people have given far more thought to this than I have. But one of the things that has certainly proved to be very effective in getting us to save for the future is simply automate our savings program. A lot of company retirement plans now do this. If you sign up to save 10 or 12% of your income every paycheck, after that inertia kicks in. And that inertia is a powerful force that can keep you saving for retirement. But you do have to make that initial step. And many companies now, they will actually automatically enroll you in their company plan. So even that becomes far easier. For goodness sake, if you are automatically enrolled, don't opt out. Stick with it, because your future self will thank you.
Jonathan, one of the things that we wanted to talk to you about has to do with the life stages of retirement, and you've done a really nice job on on the Humble Dollar website of laying that out in terms of life stages. And maybe we could start with the early years. And one of the things you talk about is the idea of putting retirement first. And I think this may run counter to some of the received wisdom that people have about financial priorities early in life. And it's not just about, today's spending. They might think, I've got to pay down my student loans first, and it's an increasing problem for people. I want to put away money for a down payment on a house. Retirement's going to come after I do those things. And so I'm wondering if you could make the case for, why should someone put retirement first when they feel like they have these competing personal finance priorities?
No, well, you're absolutely right, Alex. Most of us are tempted to deal with our financial goals consecutively. So as you say, first of all, we get out of university and we want to pay down those student loans. Then we want to buy the house. So we start saving for the house down payment. And then once we bought the house, we turn around and we say, okay, we've now got to put our own kids through college. So we start saving for college costs. And then finally, we're age 50, we're financially exhausted. We finally got the brats out of the house, and it's like, okay, what's next? Oh yeah, retirement. Oh no, because at that point, it is too late. If you deal with your financial goals consecutively and you put off saving for retirement until you're in your late 40s or your early 50s, there simply isn't enough time to amass the money you need. So instead of dealing with your financial goals consecutively, you need to deal with them concurrently. And what that means is, even as you start to pay down those student loans, even as you start to amass money for that house down payment, you've got to be saving for retirement, because if you don't, you are shortchanging your future self. You're setting yourself up for relative poverty in your later years, and you simply don't want to do that. So yes, from the moment you get into the workforce, saving for retirement should be a priority.
Yeah, one of the things that is difficult for people to do is to think in a time horizon that is more of a life cycle time horizon or a lifelong time horizon. And I guess one of the things, that people don't always realize is retirement is expensive to begin with. It's a lot more expensive if you start later.
Absolutely. I mean, the savings rate, if you put off saving for retirement until you're around age 50, is so high that, nobody, unless you're willing to eat cat food, is going to save enough for retirement at that point. But if you start early, the required savings rate might just be 10 or 12% of your income each year, which is quite manageable. The longer you put it off, the less help you're going to get from the financial markets, which means the more you're going to need to sock away every year.
You had a lovely quote. I think it was in your book, From Here to Financial Happiness, but I associated with you. The best time to start saving and investing for retirement has already passed. The next best time is today. And I thought that's another thing that captures it so well. Yeah.
So even if you have delayed saving for retirement, don't throw up your hands in despair and say, oh, well, I'm never going to have enough. I might as well not bother. That's a terrible mindset to have, because you've taken a problem and made it far, far worse. Every dollar you have socked away by retirement is a dollar you will be grateful to have. Even if you can't save enough for a super comfortable retirement, having some savings is a whole lot better than having no savings. So for goodness sake, if you put off saving for retirement until now, start now, because you'll be grateful for whatever you manage to accumulate.
And in those early years, because you mentioned what we've learned, some of the stuff we've learned from behavioral finance about making savings automatic. And another thing I really like about the way you talk about this issue is you talk about the human side of money, and you say, managing money may be simple, but it's not easy. And part of the reason it's not easy is we have these human frailties. And if you're lucky enough to be part of a mandatory savings program, say at work, that kind of makes it automatic for you. But I'm wondering if there are other kind of techniques that you've seen or encouraged people to use during their younger years when retirement savings is kind of counterintuitive and not the first priority for many people. What are some tips that people can use to kind of stick with a program that may not be intuitive to them?
So we already talked about automating your savings, but there are two other strategies that are well worth considering. The second strategy is to make public commitments. If I say to myself, I'm going to get up and go to the gym in the morning, it is so easy for me to roll over and go back to sleep. But if I tell my wife I'm going to go to the gym in the morning, I am on the hook. Similarly, if you want to save for retirement or any financial goal, or you have any other way that you want to improve your own behavior, make public commitments, because you will not want to disappoint your friends and family. You may be okay with disappointing yourself, but you don't want to disappoint them, knowing that they will look down on you if you fail to save for retirement, if you fail to lose weight, if you fail to go to the gym. That will motivate you to act. So make public commitments. That's the second strategy. And the third strategy is to visualize how great it's going to be to achieve your goals. So we know what we're going to get if we spend our money today. The shiny objects are right in front of our eyes. It's much harder to make the sacrifice for retirement or any other financial goal because it's hard to imagine what it's going to be like. So what I would say is, think hard about what your retirement is going to be like. Think about all the wonderful things you can do. Think about how great it is that you're not going to have to get up in the morning and go to the office. Think about how great it is that you won't have some boss you're going to have to report to. Think about the wonderful places you'll visit, the things you'll do with that extra time. Make retirement as alive in your head as you possibly can. Make it so enticing that you're willing to make the sacrifices today. I would take it even a step further. I would start to write down what it is that you will do with your retirement so that it becomes so real that spending today becomes far less attractive and saving for the future is super, super appealing.
Yeah, I like those other techniques. That's an interesting way of thinking about it. Writing down how you might spend your time in retirement, talking to friends or family about what that might look like, making it concrete, and then the public commitment piece as well. I guess we've seen that with when people start an exercise routine, but less so with money. And I wonder if part of it too is just getting more comfortable talking about money, because often we see it as a private subject where we don't want to raise it with friends. We might be reluctant to say publicly, hey, I'm committing to saving a certain amount in my retirement plan, or even to discuss that as part of kind of social conversation. But are you seeing any changes in kind of, call it the social stigma associated with discussing personal finance?
Let me make 2 points here. And one will seem like a little bit of a digression, but we do tend to avoid telling people how much we earn or how much we've saved. But we still want people to know that we've been financially successful. So what do? Well, if we're not going to be able to tell them the size of our bank account, and we're not going to be able to tell them how much we earn, we try to send signals to other people about how successful we've been. And so those signals are things like buying a bigger house or getting a more expensive car or going on super lavish vacations. But the problem is, the expensive vacation, the bigger house, the luxury car, all of these are actually hurting our long-term financial future. So that signaling to others that we've been financially successful actually ends up hurting our long-term wealth. So we need to somehow get away from that. And there is, my sense, a little bit more openness in talking about money among people who are younger. The millennial generation seems to be more comfortable telling their friends how much they earn, talking about how much they've saved. And I think this is a good thing. I think we need to get money out of the closet and be much more upfront with people about our financial successes and what we're doing for retirement and what we're doing to pay down debt and so on. I mean, one of the things that we know from the famous book, The Millionaire Next Door, is that a lot of people who appear to be of relatively modest means actually have managed to amass a healthy amount of money. They're the people who drive the secondhand car and live in the relatively modest home. And because they do all these things, they are great savers. And as a consequence, they're the ones who have the seven-figure portfolio. They are the millionaire next door. But we don't tend to associate wealth with those people. Instead, we tend to associate wealth with the people who have the big house and the luxury cars, the well-manicured lawn. And yet, all of those things are not actually signs of wealth. They're signs of wealth departed. That's a sign that they've spent too much money, not that they have saved money.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. The way that we communicate around money, it's very easy to communicate with consumption. It is very difficult to communicate with deferred consumption or savings, and maybe that's one of the things we need to get smarter about as a society is finding ways to kind of spread the word about those things.
One of the things that's become a notable movement, if not a big movement here in the U.S., is what's called the FIRE movement, the Financial Independence, Retire Early. And there's been a lot of press coverage of the FIRE movement. There are a lot of websites that are devoted to it, a lot of bloggers who focus on retiring early. And one of the things about this group is their embrace of extreme frugality in an effort to save huge amounts of money early in their career so that they can retire at relatively early ages. We can debate whether that extreme frugality is really, all that desirable, and whether, the FIRE movement really understands what it takes to retire early. But nonetheless, these are a group of people who are actually boasting about how frugal they are. And I think that's great. I mean, we want people to understand that frugality, as long as it's not overdone, is a good thing, and it is the key to financial success.
Maybe we could move along the age spectrum a little bit and start to talk about, once somebody has made some good progress against their early financial priorities around perhaps buying a home or repaying their student loans, and they're further along, how should they be thinking about retirement during that second stage that you talk about?
So one of the things we haven't talked about to date in this conversation is investment strategy. So, the traditional sort of life cycle model of investing is early in your career, you invest heavily in stocks. And then as you approach retirement, you start to ease up on stocks and you add more bonds to your portfolio. And there's a good reason we pursue this strategy, and it all has to do with our so-called human capital, our income earning ability. So you can think about that income earning ability, those regular paychecks that you receive, as being not dissimilar to collecting interest from a bond. So early in your career, when you're in your 20s and you have 40 years of paychecks ahead of you, that's like a huge bond in your portfolio, and you diversify that by investing heavily in stocks. But as you approach retirement and the end of the paychecks generated by your human capital, what you want to do is gradually shift towards bonds so that maybe you retire with a portfolio that's 60% bonds, 60% stocks, 40% bonds, or perhaps 50-50 stocks, bonds. So that's one of those transitions that you want to make in those final 10 to 15 years before you leave the workforce. The other thing that I would focus on heavily is trying to pay off all debt before you quit the workforce. Because by paying off debt, not only do you reduce the financial risk in your life, but also you lower your expenses. I mean, for many people, making that final payment on their mortgage is a signal that retirement is finally affordable. Here in the US, we've seen more and more Americans heading into retirement still in debt. And I think that's a huge mistake. If you can at all possibly do it, strive to be debt-free by the time you quit the workforce.
That's a very succinct way of expressing the goal. I think that captures it very nicely, yes. When one then gets to the stage where we're contemplating that transition or making the transition into retirement, into life two, as I call it, any thoughts about that, whether financial or the human side?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Don. So we spend decades and decades preparing financially for retirement, and yet we give scant thought to what we're going to do with all that free time. Earlier we discussed visualizing retirement. As you get close to retirement, you want to do this more and more. And when you visualize retirement, don't visualize playing golf every day. Don't visualize sitting on the beach. Don't visualize a life of relaxation. Instead, when you think about retirement, I'd really encourage folks to think about what new activities you're going to take on, that you're going to find fulfilling, that you think are important, that you're passionate about, that will give a sense of purpose to your retirement years. We are not built to relax. As the great-great-grandchildren of our hunter-gatherer ancestors, we are built to strive. We are here today because our hunter-gatherer ancestors never gave up on the pursuit of survival. Within us, we carry those hardwired instincts. We are happiest when we are striving toward goals, and we want to continue to strive toward goals even in retirement. In fact, I would argue that the distinction between working and retirement really needs to disappear. That this idea that we retire and we just spend the final couple of decades of our lives sitting around doing nothing is not only a terrible waste of time, but it's actually sort of setting people up for a miserable end to their life. I mean, we are not happy sitting around doing nothing. We want to be actively involved in the world. Well, but retirement is just a chance to be actively involved with the world without collecting a big paycheck.
We're talking about the need for a life and a purpose beyond retirement, not just, well, it's the end. And it's actually the best of life. You've written, as I have, about the U-curve of happiness and the fact that this tends to be the happiest time of life. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the U-curve is actually a fascinating notion. Researchers have looked at data in more than 30 countries, and what they found is that happiness through life tends to be U-shaped. So we start adult life, pretty darn happy, and then our happiness tends to deteriorate, through our late 20s, through our 30s, and then we hit bottom in our 40s. It's this classic midlife crisis. And then our happiness rebounds from there. And we don't know exactly why happiness through life tends to be U-shaped, but the theory that rings most true to me is that when we enter the workforce in our 20s, we have this notion that we're going to be huge successes and we're going to change the world, and that if we achieve all these things that people talk about, the promotions, the pay raises, buying the house, buying the car, that all of these things are going to make us immensely happy. Well, it turns out not to be the case. We don't end up changing the world. We buy the house and it doesn't make us happy. In fact, all we do is worry about mowing the lawn at the weekend. We get the new car and then 2 years later it breaks down. And we start to rethink our lives and say, hey, well, if all these material goods are not making us happy and getting ahead at the office isn't making me happy, what is it that'll make me happy? And we tend to start to look inside and say, well, what is it that I really enjoy doing? And a lot of us discover that there are certain activities that are really important to us that may not be valued in our current job. We discover that we want more time for friends and family, and spending long hours at the office isn't really doing it for us. And so we start to rethink our lives. This is the midlife crisis. At that point, many people look around and say, okay, I'm going to change careers. I'm going to take on a new job that may not be as lucrative, but which I personally will find more fulfilling. And in many ways, to me, this is part of the transition to retirement. You might be in your 50s and changing into a more fulfilling career, but that's really the path towards retirement, where you start to say, okay, I'm focused less on money and more on things that really matter to me. And I would say that mindset is the mindset that will make for a happy and successful retirement. And as we think about retirement, we should really think about this gradual evolution as we focus less on making money and more about doing activities that are important to us. Now, if those activities continue to create a paycheck for us, that's all the better. Working part-time in retirement, I think, is a great idea, but mostly it should be about doing things that we love and that we're passionate about and we find fulfilling.
And you've taken that a step further and contrasted the benefit of experiences versus possessions.
When we think about how we spend our time, if you go out and you buy a possession, that is often something you enjoy in isolation, whereas experiences are things that we tend to enjoy with other people. Going on vacation, going to a concert, going out to dinner. These are all things that we do with other people, and we are social animals. We get huge happiness from spending time with friends and family. To the extent that we have experiences, we tend to share it with others, and thus those experiences tend to give a huge boost to happiness.
I wonder how much of this affects the way people should be thinking about retirement budgeting, because there's this construct in the retirement world about living standard continuity, which is that the main goal should be to have the same kind of standard of living or consumption as you did in the pre-retirement phase. But it strikes me as you're talking that if your time is structured very differently, if you're pursuing different experiences, then your budget, your household budget might look very different. And I'm wondering if you could offer some advice about people who are making a retirement budget and trying to align that with their purpose and how to best spend their time.
When you see financial planners model out retirement, they often do have this end goal where you retire and you have enough retirement income to replicate 80% of your final salary. And so they will sit there and they'll say, well, okay, if you save, X percent of your income every year for the next 30 years, and the markets return X, you will retire with X amount of dollars, and this will replicate 80% of your final salary. I think this is really over-engineered nonsense. What I would say to people is, however much you retire with, that is what you're going to spend. And the more you have, the more lavishly you will live, the more you will travel, the more you will have the experiences of your choice. If you retire with less, you will make do with less. Experiences, unfortunately, tend to be relatively expensive. Travel is expensive, going to concerts is expensive, going out to dinner is expensive. But if you have less, you will adapt and you will figure out great experiences that you can have with those around you that are less expensive. But, unfortunately, experiences do tend to be expensive, at least the ones that we are most drawn to.
And what are some of the risks that the financial risks that someone who is just retired or just about to retire would face? And do you have any thoughts about how a person might manage those risks?
Well, the number one risk in retirement is so-called longevity risk. The risk that, you will run out of money before you run out of breath. And longevity risk can be addressed in a number of ways, to the extent that you have any sort of pension plan, or you're the beneficiary of a government pension. That will help address longevity risk because you will get that regular check every month for the rest of your life. I think that taking part of your income and buying some sort of plain vanilla immediate fixed annuity that delivers lifetime income is another way to address longevity risk and to bring a sense of financial security to your retirement, and also less financial stress. When you know that your immediate fixed annuity is going to send you a check every month, you don't have to fret so much about what's going on in the financial markets. The problem is that this runs smack into the fear that a lot of retirees have. They're worried less about living far longer than they ever imagined, and worry more that they're going to die at a relatively young age. So at least in the US, sales of plain vanilla immediate fixed annuities are pathetically low, even though in the academic community, this is a product that's very much liked. People are just far more worried about dying young than living to a ripe old age. In the U.S., at least, that's always surprises to me. I mean, we're reputed to be such an optimistic nation, and yet we certainly aren't optimistic about our own life expectancy.
Yeah, I guess this is another area where maybe the behavioral finance can be part of the solution. I mean, it strikes me that people may be overweighting the risk of dying early and therefore not getting a quote-unquote return on an annuity purchase. And I'm wondering if there are ways that you can think of that can kind of use the same way that we've used kind of automatic savings to help people start saving. Is there a way to help people improve the post-retirement choices they're making?
Well, there's certainly been discussion about having immediate fixed annuities as an option for those who are leaving the workforce in their employer's plan. Instead of just rolling all their money into some collection of stock and bond mutual funds, one of the options is to put part of their money into an immediate fixed annuity that's going to pay lifetime income. But my sense is that because of those behavioral issues, people are deeply reluctant to do so. And you see this all the time with regular pension plans. Companies will often offer employees the choice. You can either have your pension plan as regular monthly income, or we'll just give you a lump sum and you can say goodbye to that regular monthly check, and instead we'll give you a big chunk of money to take away with you. And often, if you do the math, that big chunk of money that you're going to take with you is worth less based on reasonable actuarial assumptions than if you took the monthly payments. But people much prefer that big chunk of money. And so more often than not, people cash out their pension plan, take the money and try to manage it themselves. And it can often be a big mistake because, instead of having the risk pooling that comes with a pension plan that delivers regular income, you're suddenly on your own dealing with, one life expectancy and having to manage it for that life expectancy. And that either means, you're going to, you might mess it up, or you have to be super cautious because you don't know how long you're going to live.
Right. Yeah. So thinking of investing in general, you've addressed the glide path and the sensible reasoning behind it. Any other thoughts on investments themselves, investment products and so on? Because I think you've written a fair amount about this.
So anybody who's followed my writing over the years knows that I am a huge, huge fan of market tracking index funds. Offers you a chance to capture the market's return at a very, very low cost. We know from all the statistics the most active fund managers fail to outperform the market. Over any 15-year period, at least here in the U.S., among actually managed funds, less than 10% manage to outperform the market over a 15-year period. If you want to capture the market's return at the lowest possible cost, avoid the risk that you're going to invest with an active fund manager who messes up royally, it's simple. You just buy a couple of broad market index funds that are going to capture the market's performance for you. And we know historically that simply capturing the market's performance means great returns. You don't need to do any better than that. Just riding the market on its long journey upward is a great way to make money. And in many ways, it is far less risky than investing with an active manager who may make mistakes and end up delivering results that are far worse than the market.
Plain vanilla annuities make sense even if psychologically we may not want them, and market tracking index funds save you a lot of money, which adds to the return. Okay, I think those become headlines. I mean, they really say so much.
Don, we complicate this so much, and I think, in many ways, financial firms want us to complicate this because when it's complicated, they tend to make larger fees. But the reality is, if you want a successful retirement, you start young, you save diligently, you put the money into market tracking index funds, you do that year after year, you reach your 60s, you will have a fabulous amount of money. You then take that money and you say, okay, what's the best strategy for ensuring this money will deliver me income for the rest of my life. And you'll want to keep part of that money in stock and bond index funds, but, annuitizing a portion of that money so that you have a regular monthly check coming in no matter what's going on in the financial markets is also a good idea. It's that simple. There's not a whole lot else you need to do in order to have a successful retirement, and yet, we overcomplicate it all the time. I was just having a conversation with somebody who was nervous about investing in the stock market, and I said, where do you think the stock market's going to be a year from now? And she said, I have no idea. And of course, nobody does. And I said, well, do you think the stock market's going to be higher 30 years from now? And she said, well, of course it's going to be higher 30 years from now. And I said, so what are you worried about? You have a 30-year time horizon. Stop fretting about the short term. Think about the long term. Be rational. One of the great things as an individual investor is you don't have to worry about an investment committee. You don't have to worry about disappointing your clients. All you have to worry about is yourself. If you have that faith that the financial markets are going to do well over time, if you know that capturing the market's return at low cost is enough, then focus on that. Don't focus on trying to be cleverer than the market or worrying about short-term performance and all that other garbage.
I'm wondering if we could, Jonathan, zoom out a little bit, because one of the things you talk about on the Humble Dollar site is what's the state of Americans' retirement readiness, and you cite some of the troubling statistics about the number of Americans that have an account, the amount that they've saved, the percentage of Americans that are on track to be ready for retirement, and those numbers, by the way, are pretty similar in Canada. And I'm wondering if you see any kind of promising bigger picture solutions on the horizon. Certainly people can take these kind of sensible steps on their own to be more retirement ready, but are there things that we can do as a society to help make those numbers look a little bit better in our respective countries?
As unpopular as the notion is, I think some level of paternalism is needed. We need corporate paternalism where companies are steering people into retirement plans, encouraging them to save, encouraging them to buy diversified investment options. And, I believe that, we need, governments to encourage people to delay claiming their government pension so they get a larger monthly check. Need to encourage people to worry about longevity risk. All the indications are that left to their own devices, over half of workers cannot get it done on their own. They do need to be guided and nudged and helped. And without that, we're going to have a big problem. I think we already are on track for a big problem. We are looking at an increasingly elderly population, the majority of whom are ill prepared for retirement. And, I don't want to live in a society where, I have, my neighbors living in poverty. That's not an attractive society to live in. So we need to help people make the right choices.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, this notion of paternalism, which gets thrown around as a negative thing. But, I think a lot of people, if you were to ask them, they want a program that will help make the right decisions for them, even if they're kind of being nudged into it or being even forced into it. And I'm not sure that they would necessarily see that as paternalism, because if they're struggling with these decisions themselves, they don't know what to do. It's not like something is being foisted upon them. It may actually be a solution that they're looking for. It's often that term gets used, by people that want to keep this as a more individualistic pursuit. But I don't know if many of those people that have no retirement savings would see it that way.
No, I think to the extent that, people are the beneficiaries of traditional pension plans where they didn't have to take responsibility for saving out of every paycheck, and they didn't have to take responsibility for managing that money. And once they're retired, they didn't have to be responsible for figuring out how to generate income from a pile of savings. Those people tend to be pretty happy. There's a reason that, people are happy to be school teachers for 40 years and get those traditional pensions, because it makes their financial lives far easier and far less stressful. I don't think we're ever going to go back to a world where we have, widespread access to traditional pension plans. But I think if we did, that most citizens would be far happier.
Could you comment a little bit, because you spent so much time both working, spent some time working in the financial services industry for a large institution. You spent many years covering personal finance for the Journal. Could you comment, just wondering for your views on, the degree to which the financial services industry can tackle this problem? Like, are you optimistic about the industry's direction and its ability to solve this retirement challenge?
So I do feel that in many ways, the financial services industry is a far better place than it was 20 or 25 years ago. We have moved away from a situation where most financial salesmen were charging commissions to where an increasing number are managing money as a percentage of assets, which is, involves far less conflicts. It puts the advisor and the client on the same side of the table. If the client does well, then the advisor gets more in fees. I think that is a great development. We've also seen the cost of investing come down sharply over the last 20 or 25 years, in large part because of the proliferation of index mutual funds and exchange-traded index funds. We've seen a collapse in brokerage commissions. We've seen a tightening of bid-ask spreads. In many ways, the financial services business is far friendlier to the average investor than it was 20 or 25 years ago. But I would also say that we have a long way to go. There's still, too many people who end up with high-cost insurance products that they shouldn't have, that they were sold simply because the salesman involved is going to collect a huge commission. We still see too much siloed financial advice. So it's very easy to get good advice on how to put together a portfolio, including putting together a portfolio involving low-cost index funds. But often financial advisors only focus on that portfolio. They don't focus on, am I buying the right size home? Should I be paying down debt? Do I have the right sort of insurance? How can I minimize my tax bill? Do I have the right estate planning documents? This holistic advice that people need is not getting addressed in any sort of rational, coordinated manner. Instead, I go to my financial advisor to get my portfolio, and then every so often I go and see my lawyer to get a new will, and debt, I guess, I'll just keep making those payments. It's not coordinated. There's nobody looking at the big picture, and that's where we need to head. And in fact, I would argue that there's very little room that a financial advisor can add on the portfolio side. If you put together a portfolio of simple low-cost index funds for me, that's about as good as it's going to get from me from an investment point of view. But when it comes to estate planning and getting the right insurance policies and deciding whether to pay down debt and so on, there's so much room to add value. And that's where financial advisors should be focusing. The problem is that isn't how they get compensated. And so that stuff tends to get short shrift.
And that's an issue everywhere, isn't it? In Australia, they just had a Royal Commission reporting that said it seemed as if the compensation of the advisors was driving advice, and that was not a good model.
It's a problem. What can I say?
Yes, absolutely. Have you written a lot about that sort of issue?
I have. In fact, earlier this year, I wrote an article about how I felt that when I looked at the financial world, that there were sort of four segments. There is this investment segment, which is where we spend 90% of our time. We are completely obsessed with the market. It's like the hot cattle prod, that zaps us every trading day. We're either excited because the market's going up, or we're fearful because the market is going down. And yet, while this, as I said, sucks up 90% of conversations about money, it's actually the area where we are least likely to add value. So what I encourage people to do is to focus on three other areas. One is these broader financial issues: estate planning, insurance, paying down debt, and so on. The third area that I encourage people to focus on is behavior change. It's relatively simple to figure out what you need to do with your money, but getting yourself to do it is the hard part. That's the behavior change part, and that's really tough. And then finally, an area where we need to do a lot more exploration is helping people to figure out what money means to them, so that they're truly excited by their goals, and they spend their money on things that make them happy. This pursuit of big homes and luxury cars is not the road to happiness. Instead, the road to happiness, as we've discussed, is spend your days doing what you love, spending time with friends and family. And we need to help people think more about what money means to them so that they make the financial choices that allow them to lead the life they want.
Yes, you've certainly written about that. I remember that. What kind of spending gives you pleasure, and that sort of thing. Wish list. What did you do in the past, etc. And I found those personally very helpful. So thank you.
And this is stuff I try to live in my own life. 5 years ago now, I quit my high-paying Wall Street career because I realized that not only did I have enough money saved for retirement, but I wasn't really enjoying what I was doing. I was working simply for the paycheck. And I've spent the last 5 years in this semi-retired state where I continue to make some money, but mostly I spend my days doing what I love. And it's been one of the happiest periods of my life. I tell people it's my second childhood. I get to spend each and every day engaged in activities that I'm passionate about and I find interesting, and I feel like I'm helping the world in some sense, some small way. I am doing stuff that others are finding helpful in a very modest way, making the world a better place.
And there's a sense of purpose, satisfied.
And it is, as I said, a state of semi-retirement, but I hope to stay in this semi-retired state for a long time to come, Don. As we all know, as we get older, our physical capabilities are gradually taken away from us. I can't run as fast as I used to. I don't bicycle with the same abandon I used to. But I think for a few more decades, I should be able to sit here hunched over my laptop with my arthritic fingers banging away at the keyboard. And hopefully that will give a sense of purpose to my life and perhaps, help others along the way.
I don't visualize you that way at all. Because of the fact that over so many years I've followed your writings and got pleasure and knowledge and wisdom from it. I cannot imagine you in any other shape but the shape that you have in my head.
Well, put it this way, Don. Growing old, hunched over the laptop with the arthritic fingers is better than the alternative.
Yes, thank you. I'll remember that for myself as well.
I guess before we wrap up, Jonathan, maybe you could let listeners know where they can read more of your writing on some of the issues that we've talked about. And maybe a two-part question. I'm also curious if there are any books that you've read, whether it's recently or a long time ago, on issues of retirement finance or even broader personal finance issues that you would recommend that people check out.
So let me answer the first part of the question first. I run this website called humbledollar.com. Every day there is something new up on the site. I have guest bloggers who write for me. I also write myself for the site. Typically every Saturday I have a new article of my own up. If people want to receive my articles via email, you could subscribe at the site. I also continue to write books. My latest book is called From Here to Financial Happiness. That's a book that is geared more towards people starting out, for people who have some knowledge of money and want a more sophisticated take on the financial world. I did a previous book called How to Think About Money, which I'm particularly proud of. It's had great sales and a great reaction from readers, and in many ways it's a summation of what my financial philosophy is all about. In terms of books by other people, I would recommend anything by my good friend William Bernstein. Bill Bernstein has written a number of great books devoted to personal finance. Another friend of mine, Charlie Ellis, wrote one of the seminal books on indexing called Winning the Loser's Game. It's a short book, but it's a great read. And if you're interested in delving into some of the behavioral issues, I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm touting all my friends' books, but my replacement at the Wall Street Journal as the personal finance columnist, and somebody I've known since the 1980s, Jason Zweig, wrote a great book called Your Money and Your Brain, and that'll help you to learn more about some of these behavioral finance issues, neuroeconomics, and the reason we do some of the weird things that we do.
That's a great list. There's one really neat analogy in Charlie Ellis's book that stuck with me, which is really related to the title of the book, and he talks about tennis, and he talks about how poor tennis players lose not because their opponent hits a winning shot, but because they make mistakes. And he makes that analogy to personal finance. Most of us can be our own worst enemies, and avoiding mistakes is the large part of victory, which I thought was a really neat way to think about it.
Yeah, and I think about that whenever I play tennis, and I have to say, Charlie is right, but I have not yet learned that lesson. I keep trying to go for the winners, and it's always to my detriment.
Well, I'm delighted with your list because I've actually read them all. I mean, I haven't read everything Bill Bernstein's written, but I've read several, and Charlie and Jason, yeah, absolutely. So
I've got some catching up to do.
Okay.
On, so.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. This has been enormous fun for us, as I hope you could tell, and it's going to be great fun for our listeners too. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Hi, this is Don. Welcome again to The Personal Touch, the short final part of our Life 2 podcast, in which my goal is to take the insights that our global experts give us in their interviews and try to adapt them for the ordinary person, to make your own life better, to make it more practical and more fulfilling. And that's my purpose with The Personal Touch. Now, today's episode we call The Retirement Life Cycle. In future episodes, we'll deal with the life cycle in stages. We'll talk about getting started, getting serious, and getting set for Life 2, which is what retirement used to be called. Jonathan Clements has observed life. He's written about life, and of course he's living it himself, in semi-retirement as he expresses it. He's very experienced about the subject, and yes, as we've heard from him, there really are stages involved. He identifies 3 very broad stages. The first takes you through your 20s and 30s and 40s, and that's the one we call getting started. The second lasts through the 50s and early 60s, and that's the one we call getting serious. And Jonathan's third stage is retirement itself, typically around 65 and beyond. Now, this is really useful. In my personal touch segments, I'm going to broadly use Jonathan's 3 stages and add 2 sub-stages, if you like. One will isolate the few years just before retirement. This is what we'll call getting set. And the other sub-stage will focus on the period immediately following retirement, in which there's a transition in progress, and you may not have settled fully into your post-retirement, your Life 2 lifestyle. Okay, so let's see what's actionable from Jonathan's excellent interview, and necessarily also from Jonathan's books and his Humble Dollar website, because we couldn't possibly capture all his wisdom in a single interview. By the way, this may be a good place for me to point you in the direction of a couple of books that I find helpful, but particularly so for those learning in the early stages of saving and investing. I know you can find them on Amazon. One is William Bernstein's book called If You Can, a very short and simple book about investing aimed at millennials. And the other is by Jonathan. It's called From Here to Financial Happiness. It's got the same sort of structure I've used for my own Life 2 book, some straightforward learning followed by exercises to apply the learning to yourself. Now, I've got no connection with either author. I'm simply an admirer of both. Okay, in the interview, Jonathan deals with what's rational to do, the technical side, as well as the human side, to visualize retirement, what would make you happy, what would make it fulfilling. Now, those 2 perspectives complement each other beautifully. And sometimes he has a very pithy way, a surprising way to express a message, and that helps us enormously. So here's the first big surprise. Retirement is our most expensive goal, so put it first. You know, you have lots of financial goals in life. The natural tendency, the obvious approach, is to deal with them consecutively. When you earn money, first repay your student loans, then the house, then the kids' education, and then retirement. Oh no, says Jonathan, if you do that, there's not enough time to do it well. You need to deal with the cost of retirement concurrently. In fact, because it's the most expensive goal, you need to put it first. Retirement is expensive. We heard that in our previous podcast. The longer you put it off, the more chance that it will become impossibly expensive. In the early years, Jonathan reminds us, life is a pitched battle between your whiny present self and your future self. The way to help your future self, the one that will one day become your present self and will be the one to enjoy the happiest time of life, life two, as we saw last time, the way to help your future self is to automate your savings program. Make it so you don't have to think about it. As human beings, we are very susceptible to inertia, leaving things the way they are. Okay? Help inertia to be your friend by making automatic saving the way things are for you. Another human factor Jonathan mentioned is to make a public commitment. You can tell yourself you'll improve your behavior, but you're much more likely to follow through if you've told someone else you're really going to do it. You can let yourself down, but it hurts much more if you shame yourself by reneging on a commitment you made to someone else. And a third human element is to visualize how good it's going to be to achieve your goal. I think that's terrific. In my book, Life 2, I'm your tour guide on a series of 24 walks that familiarize you with getting to and enjoying living in the land of Life 2. And to get some of what we see on the tour fixed in your mind and applied to you specifically, as I mentioned before, I ask you to perform exercises after each walk. I mean, there's really no better way to cement the learning. Well, in the third walk, I tell you that you don't need to be an expert at anything. What you need to be is an informed consumer of the expertise of others. Just as you don't need to be a doctor or lawyer yourself, you just need to be able to help them apply their expertise to you. You are, in fact, the expert on the subject of yourself. And the way to help others to help you is to tell them something about yourself. And one way to do this is for you to paint a picture of what success looks like to you. It also helps actually to paint a picture of failure. It helps experts to be told what you consider a good outcome and what you consider a bad outcome. So too, as Jonathan suggested, this is my roundabout way of eventually getting to the point. So too, it's very helpful if you paint for yourself a picture of what it'll mean to you to have the time and the freedom and the money to live life the way you want to, the way that life too opens up for you. So help yourself. Now, Jonathan also identified a lot of negative signals, if you recall, ways in which we hurt ourselves. He called it wealth departed. What a lovely phrase. He said the things like expensive cars and lavish vacations give that kind of signal. It tells the world we're doing well financially, but it may be at the cost of eventually ourselves becoming one of those millionaires next door. And somewhere else, Jonathan has written, experiences deliver pleasant memories. Possessions deliver repair bills. Remember that. Bottom line, save diligently for 30 to 40 years. And now another surprise. He says, if we're good savers, we'll probably prosper even if we're just mediocre investors. Wow, that is really unusual because we always focus mainly on investing. Jonathan reminds us, even though investing is powerful, saving is even more fundamental. He also mentioned the tipping point between saving and investing. That's when the amount that the investment return each year adds to your wealth becomes as large as the amount you put in yourself each year. Around year 12. But who cares about the year number? You know it's going to happen. And that is what's really encouraging and motivating. By the way, if you want a demonstration of those numbers, check out my website, donezra.com, go to the blogs, look for post number 18, where I talk about what I call the 10-30-60 rule. I show the numbers there relating to how wealth builds. And sure enough, it's somewhere between years 10 and 15 where the investment returns start to exceed the contributions. Jonathan's tipping point. Now, there's one other thing I've heard Jonathan quote that I want to bring to your attention. What if you haven't started saving? Maybe it's too late, right? Wrong. Here's the quote. The best time to start saving and investing for retirement has already passed. The next best time is today. Really? Maybe it's too late. Well, says Jonathan, yes, it takes years to achieve full financial freedom, but we can quickly escape a lot of financial worry. And that means that any saving at all is helpful. So don't delay, start today. Now, in that middle stage, the one starting in your 50s, said Jonathan, there are a couple of important things to focus on. One is to pay off all your debt before you leave the workforce, and the other is your investment strategy. There's a good reason, he reminded us, to follow a sort of investment glide path in which we start off with a high exposure to growth-seeking assets like equities and gradually reduce that exposure to perhaps 50 to 60% of our assets by the time we reach life 2. His explanation, totally accurate of course, related to human capital that declines over time. In other words, the fact that our future work earnings will shrink as our future work lifetime shrinks. If you want a personal story that captures this well, let me again mention my book Life 2 and specifically Walk 20, called Glide from Youth into Life 2, which brings the rationale for the investment glide path to life vividly, comparing a son's investments with what happened to his parents. Now, Jonathan also had much wisdom to convey about the post-retirement stage. One aspect was that the whole distinction between work and retirement needs to change. That's not only social change, that's change we need to apply to ourselves too. Another aspect was psychological. We give scant thought to using our free time. This won't be a time of all golf or being at the beach every day. It's important to find what will be fulfilling. Right on. We're going to spend some time on this later in the series. And a third was financial. And again, he had a most unusual perspective on this. Whatever you retire with, that's what you'll spend. In other words, you'll adapt. Gosh, when you put it like that, it's just common sense, isn't it? It must surely be true. So I'm so glad he put it that way. I think it's very heartening. And I think it takes away a lot of the pressure we put on ourselves. Just do what you can. He also had an insightful comment on longevity risk after retirement, the fear that we'll run out of money before we run out of breath. In surveys, that's the biggest fear that we have. And yet, ironically, retirees worry more about dying at an early age than about living to a ripe old age. And we also reveal this illogical behavior when we elect a cash lump sum, even if we're healthy, rather than a pension income stream. I hope we're going to be able to expand on that one in a future episode. Finally, in a great interview, what perhaps I liked best was when we put Jonathan on the spot at the end and asked him to summarize it all. I know that is something I dread personally. It's something I'm incapable of doing. But Jonathan came through beautifully. 2 things he said. First, finances. Keep it simple. Start young, save diligently, invest in market tracking index fund, reach your 60s with a fabulous amount of money, annuitize a portion of it. And investing quickly? Don't worry about the short term. The market will be higher 30 years from now. If that's all you remember and that's all you do, you'll be on track for life 2. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Life 2 podcast. To purchase Don's latest book, visit donezra.com. And for more information on any of our guest experts, check out Commonwealth's website at cwretirement.com/podcast.